Welcome to the Flock and Hive podcast, a place for curious minds to explore all that makes life so weird and wonderful. And this week,
we figured she was just dreaming until we came across an old picture of my grandparents on their wedding day. And my daughter pointed at my grandfather and said, "That's him! That's the man who tickles my feet." My grandfather passed away when I was 6. We share your real-life ghost stories.
Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Flock and Hive podcast.
Hello, it's the last one of series 2. And we'll be having a few weeks break like we did in between 1 and 2, but we'll be back with series 3 with loads more curious, interesting guests talking about things you had no idea were even a thing.
Absolutely, yes. For now, though, we've got a bit of a different one, seeing as it's the last in the series, and we wanted to include you guys because one of our posts on Flock and Hive recently went a bit nuts. And it was a post about whether you or your children had ever had any kind of ghostly experiences, either when they were little or now. And the response has been so bonkers, it's led us down a bit of a rabbit hole. So we thought that we would share some of our stories and some of your stories right here.
Well, we've always loved a good ghost story, haven't we? And I swear, if you ask anyone, even if it isn't an experience they've had themselves, they know someone who's had something eerie and unexplainable happen, particularly with kids, but with adults too.
I mean, the amount of response we've had from this post with just so many people, like not even saying what, but just going, yep, I did. Yep, my kids do all the time. Yep. And then, of course, if you start looking it up online, there are so many threads dedicated to people sharing their experiences. But before we go into all the stories that we've had, this has really made me think of a word of the week that I wanted to share with you because I think it's relevant. And that is anthroposophy. Now, have you heard of this, Boo?
No. Though I'm assuming at the anthro side, that means human, doesn't it? Like in anthropology?
Well, the anthro bit, yes. Sophie means wisdom, by the way. So hello to all you Sophies out there. Did you know this?
I don't know any Sophies, do you?
Yeah, I do. I do. I know quite a few. Hi, Sophie.
Hello, all Sophies.
There's a reason you are so wise. So, anthroposophy is a spiritual philosophy founded by a guy called Rudolf Steiner that I know because of my wine life. He was basically the guy who came up with the concept of biodynamic agriculture and biodynamic winemaking, which is essentially organic, then some, using a spiritual and cosmic element to it as well.
Cosmic as in space and stars and the moon.
Yes, exactly. Lunar cycles is a massive part of biodynamics. And he argues that there really should be an objective, intellectually comprehensible spiritual world where we all understand that this stuff exists. Like we have these experiences. So why not sort of teach ourselves how to deal with them and what they might mean instead of just going, ooh, how scary. A bit like noetic science that we've discussed before, saying that there is something else out there. So let's just call it what it is, not just put it in a box and say that's not scientific, we can't prove it, therefore it doesn't exist.
But with his biodynamic way of farming, I don't see the connection between seeing ghosts, feeling spirit entity, and working off the earth and what's going on in the atmosphere and lunar cycles, because that is arguably a bit scientific, isn't it? Like, where does this meet with the spiritual side?
Very good question, because it is all about lunar cycles and working with nature and working with the earth, but it goes way further. So there is all the working around when sap rises because of the moon, etc., which makes sense for when you're pruning vines. But also there are spiritual practices that go alongside it, so making very specific preparations that you would then put into a cow horn and bury in a certain part of the field.
Sounds a bit like farming feng shui.
Yeah. It's the way that the people looking after the land view themselves of it. It's very intentional, very ritualistic. You know, there's very specific ways that you have to stir these preparations. They have to be stirred like rhythmically in a certain direction. And that there's a process there called dynamization. And you have to do that with an intention and with focus to really energize the preparation before it's even used. You have to harvest with intention. I'd love to understand more about this. In fact, in series 3, I'm hoping to have Monty Walden come in, who is Mr. Biodynamic Wine, and he can actually tell us about it in a more articulate way.
Wouldn't it be lovely if everything that we ate and drank was treated like that?
It would be great, and I guess that's how it always used to be. But then it's expensive to do it naturally. That's the real downside, isn't it? Like, you want a nice organic box from Riverford, it's going to cost you.
That's what we've just been learning across this whole 2 series, isn't it? That it's either too expensive to do or it doesn't make enough money for the powers that be. So no one has access to anything that we actually really need.
Yeah, that's basically the crux of the whole podcast. You're right.
So with anthroposophy, it is just basically trying to validate and quantify that these weird spiritual things that you can't quite put your finger on.
And we should be taught how to deal with them, basically, because maybe there's a reason that they are happening. I mean, it certainly sounds like it from some of these stories. It sounds like, "Woo, was someone trying to protect you?" You know.
Exactly. And so what's coming up as a collection of stories, particularly about children and that what they've seen and what they've just casually brought up in front of their parents that have been a bit freaky. Um, why is this just brushed away as, kids, kids will be kids? When did we all just decide, no, that's bonkers? Is it because deep down in our subconscious we're actually scared? Is it because we've been brainwashed to robotically just follow the man? Like, it's just been cut out of our experience of life as something as, a bit insignificant or even just a bit silly.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I would love to speak to somebody who has quite a good idea about this. There are those that talk about the reason that kids see things when they're younger is because of something called hypnagogic hallucinations, and they happen in that period between being awake and falling asleep. They're saying basically it's not a real thing, but just because of the way that the mind works, that's when they have these hallucinations. But my question there is, why are these hallucinations in that case so damn specific a lot of the time? You know?
And that's annoying, isn't it? I mean, there you've just said it again. It's just passed off as, oh, this is just scientifically what the brain does when it's changing from awake state to going to sleep state. If you're conscious just for that millisecond when you're going under, as it were, then you're going to see some weird shit. But why is that just written off as, yeah, but it's just because you're falling asleep? Why isn't it being like, oh, is it because in that moment you are entering a whole parallel universe?
I know, but that's a whole, oh my gosh, that's another rabbit hole we can go down about, where do we go when we go to sleep? It's the portal. That's the portal. Ah, gosh.
Do you remember your dreams a lot?
Yeah, most of the time.
Me too. I can genuinely remember some from like 10 years ago. And I wake up and I feel like they've happened. Do you ever get that?
But we've got a thing in our house, like Hamish, my husband, he had a dream where I cheated on him, sort of in front of him, and he had to get on with it with a guy called Ian. And so Ian is now like a running joke. And we've since met two people called Ian, which is quite funny. Um,
And did you cheat on him in front of him?
no, I didn't. But he was so cross with me. Like, he was really shitty for the next couple of days because he just couldn't get out of that sort of mindset.
Because as far as he's concerned, his body experienced it. You experience that
Yeah.
emotion, don't you? You wake up either elated or distraught. Like my dreams are as real life for me.
Mm. Dreams is a whole other thing. Jung and Freud, we will do that at some point. But for now, should we tell some stories?
Yes, I'm a little bit scared, but yes.
So this conversation came about because I was reminded of something that happened when my youngest daughter, Cora, was 3. We were just in the kitchen in our old house in Marmora, which turns out several things happened in that I wasn't necessarily aware of at the time. Anyway, asked her, who do you want to come to your birthday party? And bear in mind that she's only 3 and she hasn't got this massive vocabulary yet. But it's just quick as a flash. Her first response was, not the woman. To which I replied, which woman are you talking about? My bedroom. I was like, okay. When is there a woman in your bedroom? Bedtime. Okay. And so we proceeded to ask a series of questions, that trying not to be leading, but just to see what she was going on about. And so it went along the lines of, um, is she old woman or young woman? Young. Okay. Does she have long hair, short hair? long. And basically, this continued. It turns out it was a young woman wearing brown, like a sacky brown skirt. And we asked, said, is she not very nice, or is she kind? And she just made a face like, ugh, like, no, not very nice, not a very nice face. I said, does she have a name? And she said, Margosita. No, I'm sure that is a name. And I don't know if that she just sort of came up with that. I don't know. But anyway, this ghost is now called Margosita. Um, and yeah, she was quite frustrating because she couldn't really tell us much more about it other than she was obviously not a nice woman that came into her bedroom, and then she said was there like nearly every night. Basically, that's what we got out of it. Thought that was weird. Put it on Facebook. A lot of people went, "Oh my god, Ra!" Forgot about it for a bit, and then a couple of weeks later, during that sort of sleep phase, like she was quite tired, putting her down in her cot, she just opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling, and repeated over and over again, Margosita doesn't belong here. Margosita doesn't belong here. Margosita doesn't belong here, which is when I freaked out. My God.
That what do you mean that's when you freaked out? Why the second you said no woman did you not freak out? I literally would have put up like got everyone in the car and driven across London to mum's house, basically.
Oh, well, no, I was because I was feeling quite open to all this at the time. And so I was sort of determined not to be, and I was also determined not to be scared, but I also kind of wanted to feel it myself. I thought, surely I'm this person that can feel this stuff. So I would often walk between the rooms upstairs at the top of this house. It's an old Victorian house, and just sort of see if I could feel anything. And I just couldn't. It was really frustrating.
Oh, so you were actively wanting to feel it too?
After
E
that, I was, yeah.
even at the point where she's like, "You don't belong here," you wanted to interact?
Yeah, I mean, at that moment, I put her down and walked out of the room, and I was just sort of like, what do I do about this? But during the days, not during the evening, I would go back up there, partly as a sort of protection mother thing, if I'm
Yeah.
honest. And just to see if I could sort of sense anything, like if there was any kind of weird movement and stuff, because it was a really old house, and I did wonder.
I mean, now you
Anyway,
don't live there. It was a perfect house for some kind of horror film setting. It had a lot of dark corners, potential places to just encounter something. So, should we hear from one of our followers?
let's do it.
So, this is from Shannon, who reached out to us on Instagram. Hi, I saw your post on Instagram and figured you might be interested in this little story. In 1980, I was 4 years old, and while most little kids have imaginary friends, I had imaginary parents. If my parents said something like, "Don't do that," I would reply with, "Lisa and Paula said I could." And they would ask, "Who are Lisa and Paula?" And I would reply, "Well, they are my imaginary parents." I was a pretty articulate little lady and could out negotiate my father, who was a lawyer at the time, and my folks would just kind of roll with the imaginary parents thing. We went on a trip to Hawaii with another family, and it turns out the parents of the other family ended up fighting a lot. So my folks said, "Okay, let's go out for a nice steak dinner, just the three of us." So we headed out of the hotel and started to walk down the road to the restaurant that had been recommended to them. I stopped my parents and said, "No, this isn't the way. We need to head this way." We had some time, and it was Hawaii, so my folks said, "Okay, where is it?" And I said, "Follow me, it's this way." And we headed in and out of city blocks to places we hadn't been before. Anyway, I took them to what was reputed as the best steakhouse in Hawaii, and they were like, "How did you know this was here?" And I said, "Lisa and Paula told me." The craziest part about this story is that my dad's dad name was Paul, and he died when my dad was a teenager. And my mum's name was Elsie, and she had also died when mum was a teen. And it wasn't like my folks talked about them all the time either. Imaginary parents or guardian angels, hard to say. My aunt said my mum came home from that trip feeling very rattled.
Oh.
Firstly, I would love an on hand spirit guide who can scan an area I'm in and give me the best restaurant review and take me straight there, please. Do you know how many arguments you would save between me and my husband?
I mean, right, Lisa and Paula, they need their own guide. This is amazing.
Ghost guide. The ghost guide to the best restaurants across the globe.
Gourmet ghost guide. Gourmet
Gourmet.
guide by ghosts. Right, we're on it. We're on it, Shannon.
Well, we need to channel them first.
Definitely.
But
Right.
that's lovely. The Lisa and Paula, Paul and Elsie, just the human error of a little kid's brain making that. It just makes it a little bit more believable, doesn't it? The fact that she got it kind of wrong.
It's often the random things that are much more easy to believe as well. My God.
Yeah. If you were a kid and making it up and you knew their names, you would use the proper names, wouldn't you?
Yeah, totally. I really love that. Thank you for sharing that one, Shannon.
Thank you. It was a nice one, that one. Not necessarily freaky either.
Yeah, well, they're not always freaky, are they? Although, actually, turns out quite a lot of them are. Here's a really quick one from Brookie Maria on Instagram. Lived in a haunted apartment, saw the craziest things. My dad ended up moving us out in the middle of the night after he woke up to a man, apparition, standing over him while he was in bed. And he chased him with a baseball bat and he disappeared through the front door, literally through the front door. Okay.
So that's two people experiencing it together.
Yeah. But that's just it. So another lady here, are you afraid of the books? What a brilliant Instagram name. Said, on holiday when I was little, I saw a body floating up the staircase. Still have no idea what that was. But both my kids have been scared of a corner of their bedroom. They're 5 years apart, and years apart have told me they've seen something in the same corner. Someone standing there watching. My son's only 3, so he has no idea that his sister has seen exactly the same thing.
Well, they're just validating it, isn't it? More eyes on one experience.
Yeah.
This story from Amanda682 says, I had an imaginary friend called Mayonnaise. I could see her. I believe she was a ghost. And years later, I had a strange encounter with a waitress at a pub. She approached me and asked me about my childhood friend and said she was the spirit of a little girl who drowned in a well. I didn't mention Mayonnaise to her, and I hadn't thought about her in years.
There are so many questions here. Oh my goodness. So I'm presuming this woman just came up and asked her. I mean, why would she suddenly start talking about her imaginary friend and like she knew who she was and why she started talking to her? We need more, Amanda.
Yeah, we need more. I need to know, like, how old were you when this? Were you still a child when this woman came up to you? Because if so, did you still have your blue glow of being an indigo child? Do you know what an indigo child is?
I think I do, but explain to people.
Well, an indigo child is a child who is seriously psychic and empathic and gifted in that spiritual sense. And the reason they're called indigo children is apparently they have a blue aura around them that those in the energy field can pick up on. And these are particularly sensitive children who have these psychic abilities and premonition abilities too.
God, I see. That's another whole podcast episode, isn't it?
And star seeds. Do you know what star seed is?
Well, that sounded like I've heard of starseed, and because I've seen a couple of those on the gram, where you see these very young children being ridiculously articulate about, sounding like they're 45.
But the difference between a star seed and an indigo child is the star seed is believed to have come from another planet and come via the body of a child on Earth to help humanity, whereas an indigo child is it's more about the energies they're experiencing on Earth to help humanity. They've just gained the wisdom from having an old soul from other, past lives and stuff. So they're much more of this Earth.
Oh, right. Just that then.
Yeah, just that.
Wowzers. More, more.
More. You go.
Well, let's kiss my glass. Shall I read Kiss My Glass?
Yes. Good name, by the way.
Isn't it? I think this lady is part of my wine crew. In fact, I know she is. I've been on her podcast. But she says, my 3-year-old, now 31, was with me on a trip to Ireland, and she and I happened to be strolling in a small town on our own, kind of an average drizzly day, and we ambled through a churchyard. Apropos of nothing, she turned to me and said, the people in here can't sleep because there's too many bones. Freaked me
Oh.
out for years, in a good way.
Oh, I like in a good way.
I mean, there's a question there. Why in a good way? Graveyards, though. Strange places.
My son's school is a church school and it's connected to a graveyard. And I'm always really surprised how after school the kids sort of gently play around there, very comfortable, like especially like the little ones as well from reception. I don't know if it's just a familiarity thing, but I've always noticed children really, my children as well, particularly from really young ages, just very calm and at peace in a graveyard. And even when asked what's going on, I've definitely described what's actually a graveyard is for. And it's not instantly a scary or terrifying thing for them. They just sort of accept it.
Yeah. Yeah, they weren't then, it weren't scary places. They become more so, I think, just because of films, really, isn't it? Must be.
Yeah.
Michael Jackson did a lot for making people terrified of graveyards, I think.
He ruined graveyards. It was actually that was it. Remember the end of that Thriller video? The eyes at the very end. That haunted
Yes.
me for years. I was so young, and I remember being angry at mum and dad for letting me see that because it just ruined night times for a really long time for me. And even now to this day, probably a bit over the top. I won't even let my 10-year-old watch that because he's very nervous at night. And I've probably bigged it up a bit by not letting him watch it. And the irony is, he goes on YouTube, he could totally watch it if he wants to. And I've said to him, "Have you sneakily watched it?" But I've really done a number on him because he's like, "Mummy, I haven't. I don't want to. You've scared me so much about it."
Bless him. I'm not surprised. Yeah, that gives me a feeling. Those the yellow eyes that light up at the
Yeah.
end when he just turns back to camera. Ugh.
And also hashtag 90s again. The fact that that music video was just casually on top of the pops for all children to see. No trigger warning, no warning. Like, it was beautifully made. The special effects, the makeup, the choreography, it's a masterpiece, but it is a mini horror film that just if that was in the cinemas, they would have put an age limit on it, but it was definitely just available for all of us to watch.
Can't terrify children these days.
But
Ugh.
it
Yeah.
was yeah, we were exposed to a lot of stuff like that. Anyway, next, who should we do next?
Michelle Law, I think. Michelle Law 7185.
Okay, so Michelle says, when my daughter was a baby, she used to wave to the top of the stairs. As she got older, she used to ask me who the little girl in her bedroom was. She's 8 now and often asks me why I come into her bedroom in the middle of the night. A few weeks ago at bedtime, in the dusk, I looked up the stairs and saw the shape of a girl at the top. I shouted up to my daughter and asked her to get back to bed. And she shouted back from her bedroom, "I'm in bed, mummy."
That's proper shivers, that one. Speaking of terrifying, can I read one from Mia Mezzi, who sent in via Insta? So many, in reply to, have you seen anything? So many, saw them all my life, I still do. My daughter sees them too. The most recent story was about 3 weeks ago. She was in her high chair eating lunch, looking out the window and waving. It was at the backyard, so I thought it might be an animal. I went to have a look, and oh my God, there was a person in a really strange mask that was like a bird beak, a bit like a duck bill, but kind of pointy, and had a hat and a long cloak. I told my husband, he says, "You're kidding, right?" And I go, "Why?" He says, "That sounds like a plague doctor." A what? Haha, I got educated on plague doctors that day, so she didn't know what one was. And guess what? We are now only getting over some horrible virus flu infection that has lasted 2 weeks and has been worse than anything I've had before. Unbelievable.
Are we saying the little girl saw a premonition of you're going to have the modern day plague? Was that a protective entity?
Well, it must have been if they're getting better. Ooh.
Such a specific image as well, which again has definitely been borrowed by the horror genre. That big beak is so unnecessarily bird-like and freaky. Do you know what it is? It's a crazy sort of cross between like a gas mask and a horrendous bird sculpture.
But the reason for it was because it was like a very, very early type of gas mask. This was like during the plague, that and they would fill it with herbs and things just to try and keep your like the breathing away from breathing in other people's infected stuff. And it apparently was quite effective. Like very, very old school PPE and terrifying.
PPE. Oh, the trauma of just those 3 letters, PPE. But so they actually filled I didn't realize, so that it had a purpose, the long beak thing was filled with medicinal herbs.
Yeah.
These next 2 stories are very contrasting in how they leave the listener feeling. So we've got one, which this is a really nice one, and this is another we were talking about things being comforting. When my daughter was 3 years old, she started telling us that she was being woken up in the night by a man who kept tickling her feet. But she said it didn't scare her because he was always smiling. We figured she was just dreaming until we came across an old picture of my grandparents on their wedding day. And my daughter pointed at my grandfather and said, "That's him! That's the man who tickles my feet." My grandfather passed away when I was 6.
I love that.
It's immediately scary, but actually really lovely.
Really lovely. I mean, it does come up a lot, doesn't it? The grandparent child bond,
Even if they haven't met.
especially if they haven't met. Oh.
Yeah. Oh, that's so lovely. Unlike this one from Steph Allen on Facebook. One day I overheard my daughter, who was alone in the playroom, say to someone, "Okay, I'll draw you, but I need to find the red. You have blood in your hair." Oh, God. If I heard that, I don't know what I'd do. Steph has another story, which is when my sister was little, she was babysat by a family friend who lost her husband, Paul, suddenly before my sister was born. My sister had never heard about him before, but one day our babysitter heard her laughing and playing alone in the basement playroom. She called out to my sister and asked who she was talking to. So my sister came upstairs and replied, "Paul was downstairs. He says hi and that he's okay." Just nonchalant.
Or was this the babysitter's husband who died?
Yeah.
My God, love it.
So, what a way to tap into children's abilities is to make them messengers, but in a really innocent, matter of fact way.
It's true. Well, I think this is the perfect time to wrap up what has been a very eclectic series, don't you?
Very eclectic, very enlightening in so many different ways. And I have already, 2 series in, started to put into practice a lot of things we've learned, been much more mindful.
That is the point of Flock and Hive. We're just continually learning stuff. And coming up in the next series, we already have booked in some fabulous guests. We've got Emma Bardwell, who's going to bust a load of myths about perimenopause and menopause. We've got Hannah Joy, the cult mother, coming to talk about tarot. We're going to talk about cheese and wine and how it's an all-year thing, not just in the summer, and how to do it properly. We're talking about Ayurveda, past lives and Akashic records, but also EMDR, which is the eye movement therapy. Contrast therapy, sound healing, biodynamics, loads of stuff. So please make sure you keep listening.
In the meantime, there'll still be articles going up on flockandhive.com, and give us a follow at Flock and Hive on all the socials. And if you've dipped into us and missed a couple of the episodes out, check all of them out because they are a very broad church of different topics.
That is true. We are here for curious, open-minded humans who are interested in the life, the universe, and everything. And we want to hear from you if there are things that you want to hear us talking about, or if you're an expert, to get in touch as well. But in the meantime, do keep following us on social so you know when we're going to be back. There will be another big giveaway to celebrate the end of Series 2, and we cannot wait to be back with you very soon for Series 3. And so until then, bye-bye.
Goodbye.